It's at this point that the bully, Thrasymachus, enters the conversation. And he comes in thinking, what are you guys doing? You're wasting your time. He says, look, you want to know about justice? I'll teach you about justice. He says, the just is nothing else than the advantage of the stronger. And what he means is those who are well established in the government, those who are in high positions, the powerful. So he says, look, justice is just what the people who are the bosses say it is. That's all it is. There's nothing deeper, nothing more important, nothing more significant. It is simply doing what's to the advantage of the stronger. And for you and me, who are not among the stronger, that means obeying them. Presumably, they have just the obligation of doing what's in their own interests, and they are the stronger. So for them, it's more or less, hey, pursue your own interests. For the rest of us, obey them and do what's in their interest. And so it's a pretty cynical approach to justice. In effect, he's saying what justice is just what the people who have the power in your society decide it is. And that's all there is to justice. Socrates has a very interesting response to Thrasymachus. He says, sometimes, maybe not often, but maybe frequently, rulers make mistakes. They do things that are not in their own self-interest. Now, what are we to say about that? Because after all, if justice is doing what is in the interest of the stronger, and the person who is stronger, in effect, pursues a course of action and gives a command that is not in their own self-interest, so according to your account, they're actually being unjust. But now, what are we supposed to do? You say we're supposed to obey them. But wait a minute, in this case, obedience is actually not in their interest. They have given us a command that is not in their own self-interest. So what are we supposed to do? It looks as if in this case we should disobey them? Or are you serious that the real requirement of justice is obedience to the stronger? So he's giving Thrasymachus a dilemma. Because rulers sometimes make mistakes, we have to decide, are we supposed to do what's really in their interest or what simply appears to them to be in their interest? That is a characteristic move of Socrates, to say we've got to distinguish reality from appearance, the real from the thing that just seems to be real to someone. And so in this case, is justice doing what seems to the stronger in their interest, or is it doing what is really in their interest? Now Thrasymachus at this point clarifies his view. He says, I'm not talking about rulers who make mistakes. I'm talking about rulers who actually get it right. That is to say, the stronger who understand their own interests and know what their interests are. So he says, let's call those the rulers in the strict sense, those who are stronger and understand their own interests. Well, then we have to obey them. We have to obey the rulers who understand their interests and are right about them. Well, Socrates says, okay, think about a physician, for example. Somebody who is a doctor is somebody who's trying to help the weak, not the strong. After all, if you go in and you're healthy for a checkup, the doctor just says, hey, you're doing great. Well, fine. The doctor doesn't need to do anything to help you, doesn't really need to do anything to your advantage, just has to avoid harming you. But suppose you're sick, then the doctor tries to help you. So the doctor's efforts are actually designed to help the weak, not the strong. And Thrasymachus at this point retreats because he doesn't want to say that being a physician is necessarily unjust. Even though it doesn't seem to promote the interests of the stronger, it promotes the interests of the weaker, at least if it's done right. So what are we to say about that? Now, I think Thrasymachus might have defended his view by saying, look, I'm saying that justice is really just prudence. It's prudence on the part of the powerful. And so, really, the doctor is doing what is to the doctor's advantage. The doctor in that relationship is the one with the real power, stronger than the patient typically, better health. And so the doctor is doing, well, not just this out of the goodness of his or her heart, but is actually doing this for their own advantage as well. And so I think Thrasymachus could have said more here to try to defend his view. But in fact, he doesn't do that. Instead, he goes on a tirade. He gets really angry at Socrates and says, Socrates, stop wasting our time. This is ridiculous. And in fact, he says something surprising. The just person always comes out at a disadvantage in comparison with the unjust. So justice, he says, is basically a foolish policy. It is an imprudent policy. You will be worse off for being just. Now at this point, he seems to shift gears entirely. He comes up with another definition. At this point, by my count, the sixth one that we encounter in Book 1. It is that justice is the other person's good. So to do justice is to do something for the good of someone else. Well, that sounds like charity or beneficence or kindness or something else. But no, he says, that's justice. And he's not in favor of it now. He says basically, yeah, look, I think it's dumb. Okay, you're constantly doing things that put you at a disadvantage and put others at an advantage. Now, he concludes, I think confusingly, unaware of the shift, injustice on a sufficiently large scale is a stronger, freer, more masterful thing than justice. And as I said in the beginning, it's the advantage of the stronger that's the just, while the unjust is what profits a man's self and is for his advantage. Now, I think interpreting what Thrasymachus has in mind here is difficult. After all, this doesn't sound like the position he was advancing at the beginning. It sounds like its exact opposite. Instead of saying justice is the interest of the stronger, now he seems to be saying justice puts the stronger at a disadvantage. It's exactly the opposite. It's basically not to the advantage of the stronger, but the disadvantage of the stronger. And now he comes out opposed to it. So this is a surprising turnabout. He's basically advancing a definition that's exactly the opposite of what he started out with. Besides, if we took him seriously, and this brings out, I think, the conflict between these two definitions very, very clearly. If we took him seriously, then the stronger person who pursues their own advantage would be acting justly, since justice is the advantage of the stronger, but also unjustly, in that, after all, by this new definition, justice is to the advantage of the weaker and to the disadvantage of the stronger. So something has gone wrong here. But now Socrates, interestingly, is not really interested in pointing out the contradiction and pointing out that this is not at all where we started. It's not even in the slightest. It's exactly the opposite of the position Thrasymachus took at first. Instead, this is where the main focus of the entire dialogue shifts. Socrates says, I reject your claim that being just puts you at a disadvantage. I reject the idea that injustice gives you an advantage. No, in fact, it is to your advantage to be just. And if we step back a minute and generalize this to all of morality, he's basically saying it is to your advantage to be moral. Why should you be moral? Why should you be just? Well, there may be many reasons, but a crucial reason is it is to your advantage. You will gain from being just. Once again, he draws a comparison with shepherds, with physicians, and with other craftsmen. He says, look, they benefit themselves by benefiting the other people they interact with. The physician helps the sick. The person who cares for horses helps the horses and the owners of the horses. The person who is building houses helps the people who need houses. The shepherd helps the sheep. And so in all of these cases, the person helps themselves by helping others. And Socrates says, I think that's typical. It's true also of rulers. In the state, the people who are at the top are supposed to be gaining an advantage by helping the people they rule over. And so our political leaders, they should gain advantage from actually helping the people they lead. And if they're not helping them, they should suffer. At least in a good situation, in a good political system, that's what happens. The ruler benefits from benefiting the people. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Okay, maybe in an ideally functioning system that happens, but in a lot of real political systems that doesn't seem to happen. I mean, there are a lot of bad rulers in the world who nevertheless seem to thrive. In fact, tyrants seem to exert tremendous power while putting their people at great disadvantage. And that even happens in democracies. It's very common in democracies that people claim to do things for the advantage of the people, and so they get elected, and then they do things that are terrible for the people. And so when you reflect on that, you can think, okay, so this doesn't always seem to work out.
But, Socrates says, nevertheless, there's something important to learn and something important to realize about all of this. And to understand it, we need to ask, why would a just person consent to rule? Why would you agree to be in charge? And here we could generalize this, not just rule a city or rule a state or a country, but we could say, why does anybody agree to be in a position of management, agree to be a leader, to be an executive, to be someone who's managing other people? Why do it? After all, it gives you lots of additional headaches. It gives you a lot of additional responsibilities. Yes, you typically gain in terms of power, in terms of salary, but really, it's not clear that that is a just reason for doing it. So why would a just person do it? And Socrates proposes an answer. And the older I get, the more powerful I think this answer becomes. For me, anyway. It is because the just person fears rule by someone worse. In other words, why would you do it? Because if you don't, somebody far worse than you will. And that's going to be bad for the people who are being managed or ruled or led. It's also going to be bad for you. You agree to assume that position of responsibility because you don't want somebody else having that power over you. And when you've seen some bad leaders in the state, in your organization, wherever you are, you realize, he's got a point. That really is a powerful reason for the just person to assume those responsibilities. At this point, Socrates tries to show something much broader, that it pays to be just, that there is a real advantage to being just. In other words, that prudence requires that you act justly. It is better for you to be a moral person than to be an immoral person. Now, why? At first glance, you might think that seems surprising. I mean, in some ways, yes, you gain an advantage, you gain the trust of other people, but on the other hand, it can look like, independent of God's ultimate judgment, aren't you setting yourself up to be taken advantage of by the unjust? And so Socrates has an uphill battle here in trying to convince people that it's better to be just. Now, Thrasymachus at this point surprises Socrates. After all, Socrates is claiming that you can do better for yourself by doing good for others, that you can do better by being just, by being good. And Thrasymachus says, I don't know. I think that justice is actually a vice. I think it's a weakness in a person. It's not something that is a virtue. It's not something to be emulated. It's something to warn people off of. They are going to suffer by being just. And it's not good for them. They shouldn't do it. So Socrates has to try to convince Thrasymachus that you're better off if you actually act better from a moral point of view. How is he going to do it? Now, Thrasymachus, I think, here has a very serious argument to make. He's saying the unjust person seeks an unfair advantage over others. And often, if they become skilled, they're quite good at gaining that unjust advantage. They benefit from that. The just person, on the other hand, refrains from taking advantage of people when they could. And so it looks like the just business person, for example, is going to be at a disadvantage compared to the just business person. In fact, the unjust person is constantly going to be treating unjustly the just. And so you might think that justice is going to doom the just person. And that's exactly what Thrasymachus is arguing. We can put his argument in modern game theoretic terms. He's saying basically the unjust person is the person who pursues their dominant strategy, the strategy that is better for them no matter what the other person does. And look, if you are playing somebody who is constantly playing that dominant strategy and is willing to take advantage of you, to exploit you, to defect, well then cooperation with that person is impossible. So the just person is going to be trying to cooperate, and the unjust person is constantly going to be taking advantage of them. So in game theoretic terms, he's basically saying, look, justice is a matter of playing your dominant strategy, defecting when it's to your advantage. You're a fool if you go in trying to cooperate with others. Now, I think Socrates' answer here is actually really, really interesting. Socrates says, well, maybe. But what happens when the unjust confront another unjust person. So you've got two people playing their dominant strategies against each other. What happens? They both defect. And that means they miss out, again to use game theoretic terms, on a lot of Nash equilibria that would actually be better for all the parties concerned. So Socrates, I think, has a sophisticated argument. He's saying if unjust people interact with other unjust people frequently enough, then actually injustice will not be a good strategy. Why? Because you're constantly going to get trapped in these suboptimal equilibria. You are going to end up worse off. The just person is going to find other just people to cooperate with. They're going to gain great benefits from doing that. You, on the other hand, are constantly going to be going around taking advantage of other people. After a little while, just people are going to avoid you. You'll only be interacting with other unjust people who will be trying to take advantage of you. Opportunities for cooperation are gone. At this point, Socrates says, look, everything has a function. Its excellence is a matter of it fulfilling that function well. Socrates is here inspiring what Aristotle later famously writes in the Nicomachean Ethics, right near the beginning, and uses as his definition of virtue. Socrates is saying the same thing. Each thing has a function, and when it fulfills that function well, it is exhibiting its virtue, its excellence. Justice is the excellence of the soul. And so actually it is very much to our advantage. Justice is very much the advantage of a knife to be able to cut well, or an eye to see well, or an ear to hear well. It is to the advantage of a human being to be just. That's what it is to live well. Well, Thrasymachus has no patience for this and leaves. Basically says, I've wasted enough time with you, and goes off in pursuit of his own advantage. But Socrates insists that justice is for your own good because it is the excellence of your own soul that you're promoting. Are you convinced? Well, the other people with Socrates are not convinced either. And so next time we'll talk about Book 2, where they challenge Socrates to say, look, all right, you've scared away Thrasymachus, you've scared away the bully, but you still haven't convinced us that it's to your advantage to be just. And so next time Socrates will start over again.